Hello everyone, welcome to a new video. So today we're going to look into another cool feature of Identity Server 7, which is PAR request. So why PAR request, right? The main idea behind PAR is to hide the request parameters from the front channel, which is the browser URL. So in your normal flow, you would have your client ID, redirect URI, the scopes in the browser URL. But with PAR, these information are hidden from the front channel. And so we are able to validate our client before our authorization flow happens. The authorization server has the ability to validate the client using the client credentials using PAR request. So let's see how PAR works. So we have our usual setup here. We have the client, browser, authorization server, and the authorized endpoint. So in our existing flow, we would have a GET request sent to authorization endpoint with the response type, client ID, and the other request parameters. Once the authorization server validates this authorization request, and then the user enters his credentials and grants permission to this request, then the authorization server will send back the redirect URI with the authorization code. So this is how our existing flow works, right? But with PAR, it's slightly different. So with push authorization request, we would have a new endpoint in authorization server called PAR. So initially, the client will call this PAR endpoint through the back channel. So no browser URL is involved. So this endpoint is called as a post request, and if it's a confidential client, you would use the client ID and secret in the authorization. Then you would have other request parameters in the body. So you would have your scope, client ID, and the response type and other request parameters. So once the authorization server validates this client, then it will send back an JSON response containing a request URI which is unique for this particular session, and it will have an expiry as well. So once the client receives this request URI, he is able to call the authorization endpoint using this request URI in the browser URL. So you would do a GET request using the request URI and the client ID which we used in the initial PAR request. So after this request happened, the flow is kind of the same as the existing flow. So once everything is validated, the authorization server will send back the redirect URI with the authorization code. Now let's see how this is implemented in the identity server. Okay, so we have logged into the identity server console now. Let's create a standard based application. So I'm going to name this PAR demo, and we are going to use OAuth 2.0 OpenID Connect as our protocol. So I'm going to hit create now. Yep. So yeah, our application is created. So I'm going to allow code grant type, and I'm going to put and redirect URI here. So I'm going to put HTTPS localhost 3000 as my redirect URL. And so if you go down here, you see pushed authorization request. So I'm going to make this mandatory. So this will enforce sending PAR request before the authorization, before you call the authorization endpoint. So I'm going to hit update now. Now we are all set. So to try this out, I'm going to bring up Postman and let's do a PAR request and see how the flow works. So if you see, this is our PAR endpoint in identity server. It's called auth2/PAR. So we have our parameters here. So you need to pass client ID, redirect URL, response type, and the scope. So I'm going to put my newly created application's client ID here. Since this is a confidential client, I need to pass client ID and secret here as well. So let me copy them. Okay, so I think we are all good. Let's hit send. Oops. Okay. So I think I have used the wrong redirect URL. We have put localhost 3000 here, right? So let me correct it and let's try it out again. Okay, so we have received a request URI which is unique for our current second and its validity is 60 seconds. Let's put this request URI in our authorization request, and yeah, I need to put the request URI and the client ID of this application. So let me put it here. Okay. So let's grab an incognito. Okay, so now I need to enter username and password for my application. Now we should get redirected to our application. Okay, so now we are redirected to our application and we have received the authorization code. So now we have seen PAR in action, right? So there was no browser URL involved initially, right? So first we sent a PAR request through the back channel. We received the request URI, then we used it in our authorization call, and then we got our authorization code. So this is cool. So just in case if you are using public clients such as mobile application or single page application, you should use PKCE in order to prevent authorization code interception attacks. So let's see how we can include PKCE in authorization request when PAR is in use. So let me go back to Identity Server Console. So if you go down here, so we see PKCE and we can make it mandatory for application. And I'm going to click update. So now if you go back to our initial PAR request and let's try it out once again. So I have received my request URI and let's put it in our authorization request. Now let's see what happens when we have made PKCE mandatory in our application. Oops. So as you can see, now we are getting an error. So it's saying PKCE is mandatory for this application and PKCE code challenge is not provided, and it refers to the RFC specification as well. So let's see how we can send the PKCE code challenge and the code challenge method. So you can send this code challenge or the code challenge method either in the PAR request or the authorization request itself as request parameters. But for our convenience, I'm going to send this code challenge and code challenge method in the PAR request itself. So so now we have a code challenge and code challenge method. So this code challenge is I have generated it using an online tool. So you can just type in PKCE generator and generate a PKCE code challenge. So I'm gonna hit send. Yeah. So let me paste the new request URI and let's try it out. Okay, so let me enter the username and password. Alright, so now we have received an authorization code secured by PKCE as well. Now let's use this authorization code and hit the token endpoint as well. So in order to now call the token endpoint, you have to enter the authorization code you received, and we have to provide the code verifier as well. So the code verifier is, so I use this online tool for generating. So this is the code verifier I used to generate the code challenge, and I'm going to use this code verifier in my token request. So let's see now. Okay, so now we are receiving an access token using the code that we received. So that's it, guys. So you have seen how you can make your authorization request more secure using PAR and PKCE combined. So if you have any questions and if you want to learn more about PKCE and how it works, please leave a comment below and see you guys in the next video. Thank you.